know that there are folks joining us by Zoom this evening. And also there are a number of people that cannot be here that wanted us to record the presentation. So it's being recorded and it will be available within a couple of days on the story map and on the community club's website. We have with us tonight Becky Steckler, and please give her a warm Archie Catholic. Online with us also is Scott Goodman from Echo Northwest. So even though you can't see Scott right now, give Scott a welcome as well, please. Thank you so much. Becky is directing this project, which began early in the year and hopefully will reach its conclusion sometime in November. And by its conclusion, I mean that the study will be finished and the steering committee will be able to make a recommendation. What I've asked Becky to do tonight is to give you a picture of where we are in this study and where we still have to go. But I've also asked her to talk to you about all of the choices that have to be made. Because if a city is formed, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made about the type and level of services that a new city might offer. Now, I'm just one person, but if I was making the choices, I would say I really think scaled down and very basic structure is what fits our case. You may feel different for certain categories of services. And what we need to hear from you after Becky's presentation tonight is, where do you fall on each of those types of services that Becky's going to tell you about? The real basic bare bones approach, or the more elaborate forms of services that might be offering. Now, Becky's also going to talk to you about the revenue sources. And I'm going to offer again just my personal opinion. There's a wide range of revenue sources that includes property tax, it includes transient lodging tax, it includes franchise fees for certain utilities operating in the area, and other factors that Becky's going to tell you about. Well, if any of you look at your own property tax statement, if you live in Clatsop County, you're going to see two items on that property tax statement. One is for rural law enforcement, the other is for rural roads. And if my recollection is roughly correct, that's a little more than $1.73 per $1,000 of assessed value. Those taxes would not be charged if the city was incorporated, because they only apply to unincorporated areas of the county. So that means that if we chose as a community to incorporate, and we chose $1.73 as the permanent tax rate for the new city that largely on your property tax statement, it would be a wash. But the question is, are the services that you choose, can they be covered by that property tax plus the,
I'm gonna give you a microphone.
oh,
So folks mind.
oh, plus, plus the transient lodging tax revenue and the other sources of revenue. So Becky's gonna give you a picture of those services that you need to choose among. And
Our audio has stopped.
Ralph Wyatt, a former member of our community club board of directors. So welcome to Leanne and Ralph.
Excellent. All right. Thank you all for having me back. I think I saw some of you back in May. My name is Becky Steckler, and I'm a project director at a firm called Echo Northwest. And I have probably maybe the dubious honor of being one of the few people that have worked on two and almost had a chance to work on a third incorporation study. So roughly 20 years ago, I worked on an incorporation study for the community of Damascus in the Portland metropolitan area. And now I've got to work here. I almost got to work on one for Bull Mountain and the Beaverton area. But I went to work for the state before I could finish that particular study. So, and as far as I could remember, I think there's only been about 5 incorporation studies done in roughly the last 20 years. So it's not very common for a community to say, we want to know what the kind of the options are and what incorporation might look like for our community. And so I wanted to kind of just ground us a little bit in what actually you would be voting on if you did decide and it was put onto the ballot a question of incorporation. And at that time, either in May or November, if it was recommended, then you would be asked to vote on 5 city councilors, your first city councilors, and then a permanent tax rate. And I'm gonna reiterate this, but nothing within this incorporation study binds the future city councilors to any specific future. So reasonable people, I anticipate that Bonnie and Roger do not always agree, even though they're married, on the way that maybe they should spend money or where they should get money from. And I imagine there's a lot of different ideas even in this room. And so the purpose of this study is to really be able to describe some plausible scenarios. They're not the only ones, but we tried to make them broad enough so that we could have a good, solid conversation about what a future city might look like and what that budget could potentially look like. There's a lot of work that goes into actually putting this question of incorporation onto the ballots, such as, filing your petition. There are some signatures that have to be collected from the registered voters in the area. It goes to the Clatsop County, and Clatsop County has to make sure that your economic feasibility study, which would be kind of a second phase if incorporation was desired and recommended, and make sure that it includes all of the required elements that the state has said, you need to do this. So there's some very specific requirements. And then again, it's the petition for the 5 city councilors. And so, as I mentioned, this is just phase 1 of the study. And so some of the things that we've done is we've got city boundaries, or not city boundaries, the study area boundaries, and I'm going to show some pictures of that as well in case this is the first time you've come. We've done some kind of forecast, really estimates of years 1 and 3. Those are required by the state for that economic feasibility statement, but we also did year 10 because even in years 1 and 3, there's still some kind of startup activities that are happening. You're still creating your comprehensive plan and urban growth boundary and zoning codes, like those kinds of things. And so we recommended going out just a little bit longer to get a better sense of what's kind of the steady state of a city budget. Some of this, both the expenses, think about the miles of road, think about those costs associated with roads or the kinds of revenue you can generate. What's the assessed value? So there's some basic kind of existing conditions and then some kind of forecasting out into the future. What's going to look like in year 10? Are some of these things going to change? And I'll cover that. And then really looking at kind of what are the options for those public services that could be provided by a new city and where's the sources of revenue to pay for those. And I just have to pause here and say, I really enjoy the incorporation studies because it's not too often when you really get to work with an entire community and say, what are the things that are really important to you about your community and how much are you willing to pay for it? These are really important conversations and it's great to be able to have them and work through them. So again, there's the revenue. And then ultimately, and this is part of the place we are in the process where it's important to hear from all the different community members, and the steering committee is really hoping to have a lot of those conversations to understand what's important to you. So I've got another map out in the food room. But this is just a map of the entire study area. And I'm going to focus for a minute on we've got 4 different sub areas and different things are kind of happening in each one of these. And it's not to imply you don't feel like you're a cohesive community altogether. But it's really like the first one is Arcadia Beach to the very north. And there's the only special district that I'm aware of that we're really paying attention to is the fire district. So there's not a water sanitation. But then going down a little farther south, sub area 2, Arch Cape has both the Arch Cape water district, and sanitation districts. And it looks a little different. It's the one place you have some commercially zoned land. And then study area 3 and 4 are just separated by the county line. And as Bob had said, there are some taxes that are only assessed in Clatsop County in unincorporated communities. That is not the case in Tillamook County. So any kind of, if you're from Tillamook County, then any kind of a property tax increase would be a property tax increase for your particular property. So those are the 2 other areas there. Where we are in the process. So we've been working since March. And every month we've been working with the steering committee just to kind of dive a little bit deeper. And sometimes it was preliminary information, but really trying to get into, thinking about the study area and which lands should be in, which should be out, and kind of thinking about those existing conditions and going through the assumptions and making sure they sounded about right. We've done some revisions based on that feedback. A conversation about public services in July. But as you'll see, we've collected a lot of information. So it was very preliminary, I would say, in July. And so we've got some good additional information there. And then the revenue conversation, I think in August, was really productive. We were able to share a draft of the chapters kind of 1 through 4, this analysis with the steering committee, and they could correct some things that we didn't get quite right, which I really appreciated. And that is now out on the website, so you can download that. I have a couple copies that I do not want to bring home, so somebody could probably look at that as well. But really, this time in September and October and into November is really the opportunity for the steering committee and the public, the folks that live here or care about the community to really think about, is this right for us? Are these questions kind of around the public services? Do we feel like our neighbors or maybe ourselves, yourself, you might be interested in making those decisions for the community as opposed to Clatsop County Commissioners, which is kind of the next level up that's making many of these kind of public service decisions. And the benefits really worth it. And what we're hoping to be able to do is for the steering committee to make a recommendation. If there was a city, what are the different levels of both service and where would the revenue come from? And then which of the sub areas would want to be part of that incorporation, and making sure that everybody's kind of aligned on that. And so this is just to show kind of the public forum is fitting right in here in the September time period. And so there's still, while this is the public forum, you still have several opportunities to be able to give additional feedback as well. There's a couple assumptions. I alluded to one already, and that, like I said, nothing in this study is binding on the future city councilors, except for the permanent tax rate that would go onto the ballot. So everything else it helps to provide a map, but it will be up to that city council in the future to decide what services they want and what revenues they might want to assess, except for the permanent property tax. I do want to say it's really like, I didn't anticipate there was going to be a pandemic or that all of the different kinds of changes that have really happened. It's really hard to understand like what's going to happen in the future. So these are very much estimates that we've come up with, and there's a lot of things that even if you do a kind of a longer range plan, understanding that things have to happen year by year to really address kind of those unforeseen circumstances. I also wanted to say we have had a lot of conversations with different entities that could potentially provide services. So talking to other nearby cities that might be able to provide services, or even Clatsop or Tillamook County, talking to private companies, say that remove vegetation and fill potholes on roads, to try to get an estimate for how much they might charge and what kind of services they might give. However, it's not like we've entered into an agreement and they've committed to these amounts. These are very much rough estimates, but it at least gives you kind of a sense, an idea of what's the scale of the cost and the range of items that they could provide. And the final thing I guess I wanted to emphasize here is that this is just an operations and maintenance budget. And that is there's operations and maintenance, which is kind of the day-to-day. You have to pay your staff. The plumbing goes out at some place and you've got to fix that. But it's not the capital improvement plan. And that is, you have a bridge that is failing and you need to replace that bridge, or major kind of road work. And often those things are financed with bonds or other types of kind of bigger financing, or else you get a grant that allows you to do those types of things. But just like your home, if you ignore the leak in the roof, and eventually it's just going to kind of collapse, and it's important to really invest, make those capital investments so that your operations and maintenance budgets aren't hit really severely somewhere down the road. So it's kind of one of those things to keep in mind. It's not required. We didn't include it, but we understand that capital costs and capital investments are important as well. So the first thing, as I said, is trying to estimate what is the population, the number of households, the total number of people who are employed, and the assessed value. And I'm going to focus just on 3 of these. The population, this is the number of people who live year-round in the entire study area. We know, of course, when it comes to households especially, that there is, over 400 almost 480 households. And roughly, I think it's 1/3 of those households are occupied by somebody who lives there kind of year round. So roughly 2/3 of those houses are either second homes or rented out as short-term rentals. That is fairly consistent with other communities up and down the coast. So in that sense, it's very similar to what's happening in other communities. This really plays out when it comes to state shared revenue, which is based on a per capita basis. But we know that on 4th of July weekend, that there can be up to, there's the potential for, maybe 12 to 1,500 people to be occupying all those houses. That peak population in the summertime is potentially much higher than that. And it's a bummer when it comes to the state shared revenues, but if you're thinking about police or emergency response, it's important to understand just how many people or bodies there are and who you might have to serve when it comes to sanitation or water as well. And assessed value, of course, is going to be really important when we start to think about the permanent property tax. When it comes to those public services, there's a number of things we did to try to get an estimate for what is the kind of the range of levels of service for different size cities. We looked at 6 different peer cities. Mostly they were smaller cities along the coast, such as like Nehalem and Manzanita, and there was 4 other ones as well. And that was really helpful just to getting that sense. Like I said, we also asked Clatsop and Tillamook County for some estimates and those private firms. And then the League of Oregon Cities, which is basically an association for cities across the state. And they have some really great guidance, especially when it comes to how much cities pay for staff, for people across the state. So we've got some great information from that. And again, for public revenues, I'll talk a little bit more when we get to that point. But we looked at those peer city budgets, and then League of Oregon Cities, again, has some really good information on public revenues. And then the specialist we have, this is just what he does, is try to estimate how much can you make from different revenue sources in Oregon. And so as Bob had said, if this should look somewhat similar, not the numbers necessarily, but the different tax rates, there are, I think, over 20 or 30 different tax codes. And depending on where you live, it can look really different. It's kind of mind-boggling how complicated all these different codes are. But as Bob had said, there's 2 in there, the Clatsop Rural Law and then the Road District number 1. And under for unincorporated communities, those are both applied. It's almost $1.74. But with incorporation, those 2 would go away if you're in Clatsop County, not for Tillamook County. So what are some of the services that we looked at? And we have these different categories. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but those core administrative services, legal services, and potentially a municipal court, public safety. This was both police and emergency response. Also land use planning, kind of that long range planning that's usually in a comprehensive plan, as well as short-term, kind of that current planning. You need to go in and get a land use permit because you're ready to build, sort of a thing. Utilities, there's a number of utilities that cities usually provide, and water and sewer were 2 that we really focused on. We did a preliminary look at stormwater, but sometimes it's electricity and cable and telecommunications, a few other things like that. And then finally, tourism promotion, which was really tied to the transient lodging tax. So I'll talk about that in a minute. On the revenue side, like I said, and we've talked about here, we took a deeper dive into that permanent property tax and then state shared revenues. And so there's a few caveats with state shared revenues. The statutes actually say that you have to assess a property tax in the prior year. So in year 1, they're not available, but they would be available from year 2 and on. But they're only available to cities that provide 4 major services. So that's like police or fire or land use, transportation. It's got to be, and I think I've listed the other ones up there. You have to show that you're providing those major services to be able to get state shared revenue. Franchise fees are the fees that cities collect to the utilities for the right to be able to be within the public right of way. There's coordination that has to happen, especially if it's a separate utility. And so those fees help to pay for that, and more cities, because the property tax is not really kept up with the costs of service. More and more cities are actually relying on franchise fees more than they have in the past. A transient lodging tax, I think you're familiar with a little bit, but it is the tax that is applied to short-term rentals, so your Airbnbs or VRBO, as well as hotels and things like that. And here, 70% of those revenues, according to state statute, have to be spent on tourism promotion. 30% can be put into the general fund for your community, and then you can spend it any way you want to on those infrastructure or other services. But 70% currently have to be spent on tourism promotion. And I will say that the League of Oregon Cities and other communities have made an effort in the last legislative session to change that. And I think they want more revenue because, as I said, you might have, over 400 people here year round, but really you could have 1,500 in the peak months. And so just being able to accommodate those folks and provide the services that they kind of expect or desire. And then when I get to it, I'll talk a little bit more about sanitation and water revenues, but we're assuming that's grants or rates that are charged to people that actually receive those. All right. So the one thing I want to emphasize with all of the tables, and there's lots of numbers on here, but it's to really kind of show that we were trying to look at a range. And I would say option one is often kind of the least expensive option. And then looking through, what's kind of a maybe middle of a road if there is one, or what's kind of the most expensive thing, because I certainly do not know what is important to you. For some folks might say, well, did you look at, what would it cost if we actually wanted to create this department within a new city? And I can say, well, we did look at that a little bit. And so here's some specific costs. The things that we also, oh, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. That's right, I moved things around. Sorry about that. I have here an example from year one, and this is on kind of a low end. And just kind of looking at, for those different services, for the lowest option that we looked at, what would the potential expenses be, that kind of budget? And then from the revenues, what would that potentially look like? And so for a budget that's right around 1.1 million, we assumed you would have to have about a permanent tax rate that was just under $2, around $1.93, and then collect those franchise fees and grants and some transient lodging tax as well. One of the other things we did too was to look at, if you had a house that was assessed at about $500,000, what would your tax be? And so for this one, it's a tax of just under $1,000. Sorry about that, I was jumping ahead. So just to get a sense of like, what could this potentially look like? Here we go, this is where I thought I was. When it comes to core administration, we looked at what other cities do too. Some of the peer cities actually contract staffing. So that's like a city administrator, a city manager that also does some of that city recording, make sure that agendas, all the items to organize the city council is all put together. Also pays attention to the fiscal administration for the city itself. But many cities do hire the staff itself. And I show for all of the staffing, just to make it a little easier to compare, we did show like what would it cost for a full-time person, but for a city of this size, it would be highly unlikely, I think maybe for any of these positions, maybe a city administrator to have a full-time position. And so, this would be up to kind of a steering committee or ultimately the city council to determine, like, I think we could probably get away with just a half-time person. But we wanted you to kind of know and be able to easily compare. You also have to think about a city hall and a space for city hall. And the first year, especially given kind of the limited number of buildings around here, it's likely this building itself and these spaces could be used either free of charge or for a very kind of nominal fee. Supplies and equipment, other kinds of communications. There's required mailings that have to go out, maybe creating a website so that you can publish public agendas, things of that nature, as well as the League of Oregon Cities has an association fee, and they also offer insurance, but you have to be a member to be able to access that insurance pool. So there's some kind of things that go along with that. And then we've also included an operational contingency and a reserve fund. We looked at, it's really good to have a lawyer in our city. And so everything from setting up a charter, and that's how the city's going to run itself, how are you going to operate your city council meetings, things of that nature, to if you ever get sued as a city, you want to have that legal staff in place. They also help as you're creating policies and regulations and need to get those passed. So it's a pretty important thing. You could have a city legal department, but that tends to be a bit expensive. And I will say, when I was talking to some firms that provide this kind of service, they were like, kind of in normal years when there's not a lot going on, it's on that roughly 95,000. But if there's some lawsuits and or cities can sometimes experience many of those, that it can get a bit higher in those circumstances. So we have kind of like a low option and the high option. For police services, this was a tough one too. We definitely talked to Clatsop County to get kind of an estimate of how many calls you have out here. How often are you coming out to this particular area? What are you kind of required to do and you would do regardless? So if someone was murdered or if there was a really serious crash on Highway 101 with, serious injuries or fatalities, like they're going to show up. If there's other kinds of abuses, kind of those major crimes, Clatsop County is going to be showing up and they're going to be investigating. But if there's somebody having a party next door and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you really want someone to come and just shut them up, Clatsop County is not going to respond to those unless you have some kind of an agreement with them. Other peer cities, actually some do contract with kind of a larger city that's right next door. And so we saw one that was roughly $30,000 a year and they got about 5 hours a week of that kind of response, roughly 20 hours a month. We asked Clatsop County, well, what would it look like? And I think they felt like it was the 20 hours a week was the rough equivalent to the service that they provide right now. But I would say I would take that with a grain of salt. It's pretty rough, but you might want a little bit more. And then just some looking at what would it cost. The city police department is not just the people here, but vehicles and equipment and training and kind of constant training. There's a lot more that goes into that. So that is without a doubt the kind of far and away highest cost. And it's, again, I think it's fairly rare to see a city that would potentially be this small that would have its own police service. In the conversations we've had about fire protection and fire district, pretty much the vote came back. We really like the rural fire district, so we didn't look at any kind of other options there. So you have no decisions to make when it comes to a fire district. We did have some conversations though about emergency response, and I think we're all concerned what happens with the big one. And the threat of potentially tsunamis or large earthquakes or fires. There's a lot that can happen. And so are folks prepared? And I know this community has really gone kind of above and beyond. They've done a lot of work in collecting resources. And so some of the conversations have been around, can we make sure that there's kind of that institutional knowledge and the coordination that happens. And a city would be, and potentially a city staff person, even at a part-time position, might be really valuable to make sure you've got that kind of that network in place and those relationships with your nearby neighbors to ensure like when something really important happens, are all the things going to happen at the same time that need to, uh, and do you have that ability to be able to take in funds and be able to spend them on some of these other things. So both definitely talk to Clatsop County about the possibility of including a new city in a multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation plan. So the next one that would be the next update, there would definitely be that possibility, but that takes a little bit of staff to do the coordination. And then also just the potential of having some money for materials or other kinds of supplies for emergencies, or actually having a person that would potentially work on doing that coordination. Long-range planning and current planning options. This is one that's definitely close to my heart. And there's a couple different things that have to happen. So we did ask a couple of firms that provide contract services for small jurisdictions. And so they gave us a quote right around $100,000 for that first year. But this is one where you might see a city that even this small actually hires some staff to do some work. And so that's when we start to get into like a planner or a planning or community development director. And one of the things they have to do that's really important it's required within the first 4 years is to adopt a comprehensive plan, urban growth boundary, and the implementing zoning codes for that comprehensive plan. And so those documents, those plans are required by the state of Oregon, and they're very analytical. The folks that I work with regularly help cities update their comprehensive plans and doing that kind of analysis. And so those plans can be, I would say, definitely in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. And we did ask Clatsop County, if you wanted to have your staff be able to do that analysis, and they gave us a quote that was a little lower. And then from the other consultants that I work with, had a quote for how much it would cost. That's usually a price tag that covers like 3 to 4 years. You don't do everything all at once. There's a bit of an iteration to that. There's also in current planning, like you've got your plumbing went out, and so you need to get, update your plumbing and get a plumbing permit, or you really want to do a major remodel to your house. And so there's potentially other kinds of building permits or land use permits. And there's a bit of time while the new city is getting organized that you would likely want to contract with Clatsop County, because they have all those inspectors in place. And it's likely you would keep that code in place until the new city could actually replace it. So that's a bit of a dance and timing thing that you would have to do. The special districts. So this is an interesting one. When a community incorporates, the default is if there are any special districts that are totally encompassed by the new city, then they are automatically absorbed into the city, and all assets, liabilities, debts, other kinds of resources are transferred to the city, and it ceases to be a special district. However, there is an exception, and just in the incorporation ballot description, it can say we are actually going to leave this special district exactly as it is, and we are not going to incorporate it into the city. So it's really kind of a decision of, what do the special districts want to do, and what is the desire of the folks that are looking to put that question of incorporation onto the ballot. And so we just looked at kind of two options, and the first one is everything remains exactly as it is. None of the special districts are absorbed. And then the second option is those special districts are absorbed, and we're just assuming that the costs, the rates and the expenses that the special districts are currently assuming kind of continue into the future. And both, I will say, Arch Cape and the Arch Cape Water District and the Arch Cape Sanitation District actually do a 10-year forecast. And so the numbers look a little funny. It goes from $1 million down to $623,000. And I actually pulled the numbers from those particular years that they had done that forecast. So I think they actually have some planned specific expenses in those years that they're anticipating. And that's why it moves around. It wasn't, I was looking at their materials, and was not doing that forecast. I did have to, their forecast goes to 2035, and I'm like, oh, I needed one more year. And so I took an average of the growth over that entire period and just applied it to get to a final year, to get to 2036. So that's the sanitation district, and then that's the water district. It's the same thing. And here, there's both the sub area 2 in Arch Cape, and then sub area 3 and 4 with the Falcon Cove Beach Domestic Water Supply District. Just looking at there we did have to forecast into the future, so it's a very rough approximation. But again, we assumed in the budgets that they basically equaled each other. Transportation. So this is one where it really depends, like the cost of transportation services really depends on how many roads and the condition of roads, and is it gravel or is it asphalt? And I got some information from Clatsop County, but I have to say, like every map I looked at, I'm like, I feel like I'm missing another mile of roads. And is it a public road or a private road, or is it just a more informal gravel? And so with the best data we had, that both looked at both, which were asphalt, which were gravel, and the conversations we had as well, was saying, like, at a very minimum, you gotta make sure that your emergency vehicles or PGE that needs to do maintenance those vehicles can get down the road. And so, as well as just everyone who lives there that has to travel on them kind of day in and day out. So removing some vegetation from the side so it doesn't get overgrown, filling some of those potholes at a minimum, I think is the real kind of minimum there. And then a number of property owners are collecting, I'm sure some of you here, actually do the maintenance. You organize and find a company that'll come in and grade the gravel road and fix those potholes. And you organize as personal property owners, or actually, I know on Carnahan Road, they just resurfaced the paved bit of the road that's out there. So we got some quotes for what that would cost. And then I think it was myself, I was really curious, like, how much would it cost to pave all the roads? And so just taking that amount and applying it out. Nobody is suggesting that, but in case somebody did ask me, like, what would it cost? I would I have a number for you. So looking at it again into the future, we've got kind of the very minimum amount. And then from what I heard from folks, they recommend that gravel roads are graded. They recommend every 2 years. I know some folks go 3 years, much more than that, and it's pretty rough. And then for paved roads, they do recommend resurfacing those roughly once every 20 years. And most larger cities will have some kind of they'll only do a portion of the city and do that kind of work. So we've kind of built that out as well. Revenue. Okay. So as we had mentioned, there's a couple different things that are going on. And if you look at the study that is out there right now, we definitely show kind of a wide variety. We said there's all different choices you have when it comes to public services. And ultimately what I was looking to kind of solve for is how much do you have to make up, what would the permanent tax rate have to be so that you could get your revenues and your expenses to balance. So many of kind of the sample or alternative budgets really kind of look at those different options. And here, I think I've talked about most of these, but at that $1.70, almost 74 per thousand, that's how Oregon expresses and calculates property taxes. For the entire study area, you would raise about $973,000 in 2027. And that goes up. Oregon has passed measures 5 and 50, gosh, in the 1990s, I think, that really both cap the total amount of tax that can be applied. For local government, it's roughly that $10 per thousand. They're not supposed to go above that. And for education, it's like 5 per thousand. And then, and there's a limit too, the assessed value cannot increase by more than 3% per year. So that's kind of built in as well. Where you get a little additional bump is if you have a brand new house or other kind of property that's built, and then that comes in with that new assessed value. So you might be able to increase a teeny bit above 3%, but it's usually not by much. So we forecast out into the future, how much is that assessed value going to grow? And so how much could you potentially collect at that level? The state shared revenues, I think I've talked a little bit about that and the kind of the constraints on that. So in year one, we don't show any revenue from that, but you get roughly, you know, in the $40,000 by years 2029 and then 2036. The franchise fees, there's not really, there's kind of limitations on how high those can be. And what we did is we actually looked at those peer cities, and there's a real mix of roughly, I think it was like 5 different utilities that paid them. So only one city had a natural gas franchise fees. But I think 4 roughly had, you know, telecommunications, and 4 or 5 had electricity, kind of things like that. So we took the average for those 6 peer cities and then applied that average to the number of households in the city area to come up with that that estimate. So it's, again, it's a little bit more than the state shared revenues of around 50, a little over 50,000. The transient lodging tax, I think I talked about that as well, that there's, if you are going to apply that transient lodging tax, 70% has to be used on tourism promotion. And there are other things you can get, you can generate revenues from. So grants, and there used to be a few more. There's not quite as many today from many jurisdictions that definitely from the federal government, some of that has really dried up. But transportation, roads, there's often quite a few grants. There used to be more from FEMA for disaster resilience. That was really important. That has been a really important one. And the Department of Land Conservation and Development have historically provided grants to cities to update comprehensive plans, things of that nature. So we've assumed that roughly 50% of your cost for those long-range plans might be funded by grants. And then the sanitation and the water revenues, we are assuming are basically that you're going to be balancing the expenses with the revenue that is collected through those rates. Or grants, that's another one where there's often infrastructure grants that you can apply to the federal government to do some kind of really major things that might have to happen. And so kind of circling back to what we're really interested from all of you, and you have some options here from kind of, and this is where I think it's going to be really important. As I've kind of talked through those different options, I have on the boards just kind of that reminder of what those are. And so you've got some dots that are on the table, and this is where you can actually go around. There's one for each board, and you can say, well, I think for, you know, for police, I'm okay. There's not a lot going on. I feel pretty safe. You know, maybe the low option is right there, and you can put your dot either on the table itself or underneath. There's a kind of the range. Or you could say when it comes to the sanitation district, I really want it to be part of the city. So I'm going to put it on the revenue that says the revenues can be part of the city. So I'm going to put my dot there. Or you could say, I really want the special districts to be on their own. So I'm going to put my dot in the 0 line that's there. And it all kind of comes down to, where do you personally feel like would be important, you know, for the kind of lower expenses and services and lower revenue generated, or kind of that higher revenue generated and provided services. And I will say the permanent property tax is just what it says. It is permanent. And so it's really important to think about how much revenue do you generate from that? And really, you don't have to, Nick reminded me of this, I think at the August steering committee, that is the allowed rate. It doesn't have to be the rate that is applied. But you can never change, you can never get to that cap in the future. So it's important not to say, we're gonna do 50 cents and raise money from other sources, because you can never increase that again. So, but your city could say, we're gonna put it at $2, but this year, our expenses are low enough, we're only gonna assess, like maybe $1. So there's the flexibility to go down, there's not the flexibility to go up. So kind of on one side, I've got, you can have more dependence on the property tax, and that gives you more flexibility over time because you don't have those same kind of restrictions on all those different sources. Or if you look for that kind of more diversified funding, then you have kind of less of that flexibility over time. And time is really critical here. I don't know if I know of any city in Oregon that isn't having some kind of a fiscal challenge. And a lot of it's because they got locked into their permanent tax rate, and the demands for service and the increase in the cost of those services has really gone up over the last, well, since the 90s when these restrictions went in place. I feel like I have talked a lot, and I started with the other table. I think I might just leave it here and allow folks to ask some questions. And we can also, you don't really need to talk to me necessarily. You might want to, Bob, do we want to also just ask some questions generally and then be able to go out and take a look and let folks kind of vote and talk to steering committee members?
I think we'd like to do both. I think, allocate a amount of time to questions people want to ask in
Yes.
a large group. And if you're on the steering committee, could you, just stand up real quickly? What I'd like to do after Becky has taken any questions is these folks on the steering committee have been working closely with this, and they'll be out there in the community room. And if you've got questions about any of the posters there that would help you to indicate where you fall on the expense scale, speak with one of these folks and maybe that conversation will help you make a choice.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take a few questions and then move to the community room.
That sounds great. And I just want to recognize too, I know some folks are like, I don't think the benefits are going to be worth the cost of doing that. And that is, that's definitely something I think the steering committee wants to hear as well. And there might be some folks that are like, yeah, I think I might want to have my neighbors, or I myself want to be on city council instead of the county commission. So all of that is, I think, what the steering committee is hoping to hear. Question?
You had figured up there for the estimated revenue and the grant lot,
Yep.
and how do you treat in, is that the collective revenue, is it current, rate or something to the rental rate? Importantly, how do you 70 and expand your farm? Where is that in the estimated budget?
I am so glad you asked.
Can you please say that question again so that the folks online can hear it?
That's right. So there was a question about the transient lodging tax. And it was, how do we make this estimate? And then where does that show up in the tourism promotion show up in the budget? And so basically, the gentleman that I was working with, Nick, he looked at both the peer cities and kind of with his experience looking around Oregon. And it's fairly common for cities definitely up and down the coast to charge about, it's anywhere, I think he said from 9 to, I'm not gonna get this exactly right, somewhere between like 9 and 11%. And so, so basically he took the average for the peer cities and said, if you applied that, and this is one where I'm just trying to think, Scott, we've gotten some good information from Tillamook County. And we were able to come up with an average per house that that is a short-term rental, and we basically use that assumption for the rest of Clatsop County, and I'm still waiting for some better information, and I'm hoping to get that. So that is one of those estimates that would be potentially to be revised, but I think we're in the neighborhood.
But is that 30% of the full?
Oh, this is the full, so for example,
How do your estimated expenses?
Yep.
Treat the 70% that you're required to spend on something?
Yep.
Other than
yeah, so I have the transit lodging tax in this kind of high expense. We estimated 4 years. That's the wrong, let me go to year 3. Okay.
The total amount goes up as income to revenue to the city, and then
yeah, 70%.
70% of it's shown as an expense, and the other 30 treated as part of general revenue.
And I'm,
Okay, I understand that. Asking what the 70% is for.
Isn't it the last line, the expenses?
it's supposed to be, but I think I've got an error there. So, but I've got my.
Oh,
Oh,
I see it.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Transit lodging tax, I kept on looking at 83, but that's my grants. It's, so that, in this year, year 3, we estimated that the transient lodging taxes would be almost $400,000. And then we just got the tourism promotion at 70% of that. So, and it only shows up if you're applying it. So over here, we assumed you weren't collecting a transient lodging tax 0, so then that number 0.
Can I have this classification?
Oh. Yes.
So the county several years ago adopted an ordinance with the with a certain percentage of the transit occupancy tax collection to road and drainage improvements in hardscape outside of roads that are been public roads that are been accepted for maintenance. And I wondered if the county has shared with you, since they have not ever shared with the community, how much they have collected each year in that category and what they have done with it.
I can't say that I've gotten those exact numbers, but when I did talk to the transportation district, they did say that they were spending funds on vegetation and pothole maintenance. But I don't have an exact number for you. Yeah.
They're not spending anything.
That may be. Yeah, I know I've got some other questions. Did you have a question?
On the transit lodging tax, is that based off of the current number of short-term rentals
Yep.
versus the
Oh.
allowable amount? Because there's double that allowable amount.
No, this is.
Number would go down.
It would totally depend on, so cities can, so there's 2 different things going on. There are short-term rental regulations and cities have some flexibility on how they regulate and where they allow them. Are they allowed within a certain, distance from each other? There's lots of different things that can go into that. So depending on what the city decided to do on short-term rentals would help to determine like how many there actually were. So it's a little bit of, we don't know what kind of laws that the new city would create around short-term rentals. So just kind of taking a rough estimate of, roughly what's happening here, or saying if, approximately X% of the homes are currently short-term rentals, we would assume that into the future and say if it's on average, the amount that's generated. And again, it's from the small amount in Tillamook County that we've got the better information. So we're applying that over here. It's rough and we explain it in the report. And if I get better information, I will definitely update those numbers. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Okay.
One is, where would the emergency medical response, where would that be? So if somebody has a heart attack, and presently, I think the ETM from Seasides comes out or something, so where would that be in this budget?
I think it would still remain with it. We didn't look at emergency, like ambulance response.
But it was covered by our taxes, it wasn't a private ambulance.
Correct. And so for any kind of, county related taxes. I know there's a 911 tax as well. Those would still be in place. The city wouldn't be replacing it. So it's not in the current city budget. It's pretty rare, I think, for small cities to provide that, but larger cities do.
So we would provide as it is now.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, you mentioned that over the last many years,
Mhm.
so many cities or rural areas have done studies to become cities. I think you mentioned like 20 years.
I want to say there's been 5 studies. Of those, only 2 were successful, and then Damascus actually decided to unincorporate, which I think is one of the only cities that I know of that has unincorporated.
So out of 5, I'm going to say 2 are successful. That means they decided to be a city.
Correct.
They
That I
might
know
not
of.
have thought that was successful. And one, third one is Damascus decided not to be. So 2 of them decided not to be on the get-go.
I think it's just Lapine and Damascus that were successful. Does anyone else know of another one? Okay,
So only 1 out of 5.
Yeah, that
that decided.
is still a city today.
Give us some indication of why Damascus decided.
Recommend that they incorporate.
I didn't make
Study.
I didn't make any recommendation. It was, giving the information and, Damascus was really different in that it was the area within the Portland metropolitan area. And it was kind of like where growth was supposed to be funneled. So there was pretty big expectations of where that was going to be. And it was much larger numbers. I think they were supposed to grow from and I'm going from memory here, from 20 years ago. So roughly 10,000 people, maybe when they first incorporated, to over 30 or 40,000 within kind of a 10-year period. And a lot of additional work had already been done by Metro, the regional government, definitely before we got there. And so I think for them, incorporation was a way to control, not having Clackamas County make the decisions for them, and instead being able to have their own city councilors. And what I think was a really difficult choice for them was trying to adopt a comprehensive plan that felt like they were preserving their community, but they actually never adopted a plan successfully. And there was a lot of tension between, was it actually going to be acknowledged by the state of Oregon and comply with Oregon's 19, of which 15, I think, apply in the Portland metro area, regulations. So it's challenging. Yeah, Chris, I didn't want to put you on the spot.
I appreciated the discussion that you had the other day from the Lapine city manager and the Manzanita city manager. And I think when something said at the very beginning, it's just super important that we can put dots where we want, but it's the city council that gets adopted that actually makes a decision what goes into the plans and the revenue and everything. And so I'm simply trying to think about a city that's incorporated that doesn't have a real commercial area. And you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that commercial properties generate more property tax revenue than residential.
Mhm.
So could you envision a lot of pressure to have more commercial property once you start getting going and realizing how much things cost
Mhm.
to cover the costs? And I'm just trying to think of a city that it has been incorporated. I'm thinking Lafayette, I'm thinking of a few, but that doesn't, Lafayette does have some commercial, but I'm and I'm trying to think through places, and I really can't think of a place that has existed that didn't have commercial revenue.
Right.
Jobs.
Yeah.
So it feels like that could be
Yeah.
a little bit different than what Archcase is now.
Yeah, so for the folks online, there was a question about, what kind of communities have we seen, especially that have incorporated maybe recently, that didn't have a lot of kind of employment serving. So this is your commercial, residential, or excuse me, retail, commercial, office, could be industrial. Many cities have places like that, or even institutional, where you're going to put your schools and post office, kind of things of that nature. And so definitely goal 9 of Oregon's Land Use Planning Program is the economy goal. And it says that cities and communities are supposed to plan for places for people to work. And so there's some of that pressure. You're going to have to, as you're adopting your comprehensive plan, say, how is the city going to plan for places where people can work and live? And so I think that given the very small amount, I think there's only 4 acres of employment lands or employment type lands, commercial, in the area. And so I think that will be a challenge. There's probably a few that don't have very many, but you know, is it French Glen that has a population of 3? They do have that. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered.
Yeah.
There's not too many, but
Think about what's out, I guess, because we all know grants are really hard to come by,
Mhm.
especially FEMA. I mean, there's a lot.
Yep.
GLCD, and we know how much it costs to do a study to actually get approval to expand a remote boundary and the support that you need for that.
yeah,
And then roads, if there is development, who is gonna pay for the roads? Is that gonna be local developers that are gonna pay for it, and how is that managed? So
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of how the cost could easily grow. And so I'm just thinking of.
which is,
Yeah.
yeah, so costs for public services and definitely capital improvements, it can definitely grow over time. So I got a question over here.
The steering. I want to ask the big why, like
Mhm.
why incorporate?
So there was a question about why incorporate, and Bob, I might ask you to speak into the microphone. And just be careful not to turn it off.
Yeah, all right. The reason for studying the question of whether we should incorporate has, I would say, the principal underlying reason is that we live in this remarkable, beautiful, unique area. And we all love it the way it is. And we treasure everything about the environment that we live in. And yet we don't have control on a direct basis over things like lot sizes. Or whether or not wetlands are protected, whether multiplexes will be built. And so there is a sense that there's been if you know more than anyone, as you've been so much a part of this community, you know how dramatically it's changed in the last 20 years. And if we would like this community to be how we perceive it should be, there's a real desire to be able to have a city council that we elect that adopts its own zoning ordinances and applies those so that decisions about those critical issues can be made by folks like all of you sitting here who are elected to city council, as opposed to having those being made at the county level and applied as a matter of necessity to all of the unincorporated areas of Clatsop County, sort of on a one-size-fits-all basis. So that desire for control is, I would say, the number one driving force for looking into it. The second one I would say is that there has been a perception that dollars that this community puts into the road maintenance fund are not finding their way back to the community in proportion to the amount of our contribution. And then there's also an issue that has come up in the minds of many, and I've got to be delicate about this, but I don't, maybe I don't because I'm old, is that our community has an average age of over 70. And virtually everything that happens in this community, and there's a lot. I mean, you think of the work that's been done on emergency preparation, just as one big recent example. It's all being done by volunteers, largely who are over 70. And the question arises, how do you keep continuity and institutional memory when we don't have any structure to assure that all of that knowledge, I mean, I look around this room and I just see this amazing amount of knowledge about communications, emergency preparation, land use, finances. And then I look around and I say, but the people in whose heads that knowledge is resident are my age. And we need a mechanism, or we need to think about whether we need to have a mechanism so that that knowledge can be passed on, and so that Arch Cape 20 years from now will look like the Arch Cape that we all perceive it to be, with its meandering Arch Cape and Falcon Cove Beach with, meandering roads and beautiful beaches and wonderful sort of hidden spots to enter the beaches, and this wide variety of just different types of just homes that fit in so nicely. We want that to persist. We got to think about some mechanism that's going to make sure it does. So control, return to the community of taxes that we pay in terms of infrastructure investments, and institutional memory are three of the big driving forces for thinking about it. And then there's one more piece to answer, or try to answer a really good question, is that when I look at all the choices that Becky put up there, and I had the benefit of being able to look at the report, before tonight, and I sat down and I did kind of what we're asking you to do tonight, and I went through every one of those categories and said, do we need a city hall, or do we want to just use the fire station? Do we want to do the low-cost core administrative services? Well, I went through and I just made my own list of my choices. And my choices is just Bob, one person, and I don't get to make the decision. I came up with somewhere to run a real conservatively managed city that kept a contingency fund and a reserve fund, but provided very basic legal services, administrative services, police services, left the special districts as they are, water, sanitation, and fire. And I came up with about 11 million one to $1.3 million of expenses.
I put it up, Bob.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then I looked at, I said, okay, so say let's, collect the transient lodging tax, let's set the property tax so that it about means that everybody's bill will be the same after incorporation as before incorporation in total. Let's assume we charge a few franchise fees, get a few taxes. And my conclusion was that size of a city fits what I perceive Arch Cape to be. And that we could operate a city for about that amount of money. Keep a contingency and a reserve going and run the city responsible. All right, so that's just my, I mean, I have not reached my final decision, but that's how I feel about it. But that's my initial pass, and I say, okay, that's gonna be hard to do. And the reason it's gonna be hard to do is we have to elect 5 people to the city council who are willing and able to, adopt that zoning code, et cetera. And to me, that's a challenge, but I think it's one that the city, if it was formed, would step up to. Because when I look around, like in a group like this, or when I walk on the beach at Arch Cape, and I am blown away at the amount of experience and talent in the community. So I think if we decided we want that control, we want that return of tax dollars, we want that institutional memory, we're gonna keep it at a very conservative, call it bare bones budget. I think people would step up to the plate and serve on city council and manage that. So that's my quick analysis, but that's just what.
Just real quick, we did have a question online that said another way, couldn't these issues be addressed at the county level with our community's involvement without incorporating into the city? Couldn't the county do this?
Well, our commissioner, Leanne Thompson's with us, and she's probably better suited to address that question if she wants to. But I would say that our county has, my quick take on that is that our county has an amazing geographic area to cover and huge issues facing it and limited resources. And the county is able to manage all the unincorporated areas sort of in a uniform manner. And they're not positioned to come in and say, well, Arch Cape, let's tailor our, ordinances and services to meet the needs of Arch Cape. And by the way, the areas up by, Elsie, well, we'll do that in a unique way that fits that economy there. I don't think the county is in a position to provide the kind of unique regulation that's needed so that Arch Cape 10 or 20 years from now looks like the Arch Cape we all and the Falcon Cove beach that we all love. Yes. Yes.
Because we are in Falcon Cove, we are the far south end of this study area. As you pointed out, we were divided because of the county line from our community, which is Coast Beach, Falcon Cove. So I would just like to say, on behalf of Sonoma County and people that I've heard from, and as residents and property owners in Sonoma County, we're quite pleased with our county. And I would appreciate anybody that's actually there from Sonoma County to speak up to that, whether you agree with me or not, on that. So, thank you.
And there was a question over here, and I have not been intentionally ignoring that, probably
After I speak, you will. I can appreciate your vision, which you have been very clear that it's your own personal opinion. But I want to know why you think that we that have property in Falcon Cove or Cove Beach would appreciate that kind of vision. Many of us would like to have it just as it is, with no more money, just, we like the gravelly roads. We don't want streetlights bothering the birds on the bird rocks. There's a whole list of things that we love about the way it is now. And I wondered if you'd done a poll of the residents there. And the other difficulty is if you can own property there, but if you're not a resident, you have no vote. So it's uncomfortable to sit here and think this could all come down and I have no say so or vote about it.
Bob, just for the folks that are online, it was kind of a question of, some folks in Falcon Cove Beach really like the way that it is right now, and so.
I'm speaking for myself.
Yes,
Of course.
one person in particular, but I've heard it before as well. For those that do really like it the way it is, how else will the steering committee consider the input from the folks at Falcon Cove Beach that don't want to change anything?
I'll say a little bit first, and then I would greatly appreciate it if one of the folks from Falcon Cove that's on the steering committee might help me address this question, but first of all, I wouldn't personally presume to know how the folks in Falcon Cove Beach feel about this. At the outset, they being Falcon Cove Beach was included not because we felt that the folks in Falcon Cove Beach would feel exactly the same as the folks from Arch Cape, but we felt that since this community club and this region have long treated Arcadia to Falcon Cove Beach as a single community, that it would be presumptuous of us to undertake a study and say, we're not going to include you in it. So, having started the study, one of the first things we did was divide it into 4 separate sub areas: Arcadia Beach, Arch Cape, Falcon Cove Beach, Elk Flats, so that we would be in a position to look at each of those independently. And now that we're this far into the study, the steering committee has taken action to formally allow the folks of Falcon Cove Beach to exercise whatever their local decision might be in a formal matter. And I don't know if Rick, you want to talk about that or not, but put you on the spot.
Thank you. So what Bob is referring to is a procedural rule that we work together with other sub areas to allow a sub area to withdraw before a recommendation takes place to the county and to the community club, if that sub area chose to not be part of consideration for the new city. And so that procedural rule would represent the community's feelings, not just the steering committee's representatives, but everybody in the community that provided feedback as to whether or not they would like to be considered for the city or withdraw and not be considered for the city.
Can I just make one sort of point on that? The way this was laid out, and Becky, maybe you could actually explain it more succinctly, is that when the vote comes to the steering committee, the sub areas, it'll be looked at whatever the feasibility justifications are. And it will be looked at for each of the sub areas. So that was already in place. And if the steering committee as a whole makes that assessment on a sub areas ability to add to or distract from. Could you talk to that?
Yeah, so having done this once before and having to go back and redo some analysis because they said, well, what about this other area? I know it's really important to kind of look at both, you know, what are the differences between these different areas and also, I think just like you said, if some areas decided that they didn't want to be part of the incorporation, how can we set it up so it's easy to segue right into that economic feasibility, like the required elements for putting something onto the ballot? Like many things in Oregon, even if, say, just Arch Cape incorporated, and none of the other sub areas did, at some point in the future, if you did, 20 years goes by and maybe Falcon Cove Beach now says, we want to be part of this city, then there is a process for that. And there's another vote that could potentially happen. Even if the special districts are not absorbed into the new city, at some point in the future, you change your mind and say, we incorporated and now we want to, 20 years have gone by, we want to bring the special districts into the city. You can do that. It just takes another public vote. And public votes are not easy, so I don't want to make it sound like, yeah, it's no problem, just, you know, vote on it, and it brings it right in. These are always kind of challenging conversations to have, important, but challenging. But those things can change over time. So like many things, it's not as permanent, except for that permanent tax rate. It's not as permanent as a permanent tax rate.
Another question.
Sure.
What things are decided at the city level and the county level, such as lot size, wetland, preservation and multiplexes, as Bob mentioned, what of those are actually would be a city? If it was incorporated, would actually find what things would be superseded by the county.
It is complicated. It is really complicated because for wetlands, for example, there's national regulations and then there's kind of state implications in it. I am definitely not a wetlands expert, so I can't tell you all those permutations, but there are definitely specific regulations that cities have to put into place to protect those wetlands, but they're often, you know, really having to look at a wide variety of kind of guidance. So wetlands are kind of special, and some of those natural, you know, natural resources have that kind of special requirements to them. When it comes to things like land use and housing, then there is a lot of requirements from the state. It's really at the state level. And then local cities and counties have to implement different kind of elements to it. So when it comes to, and basically cities have to make sure that they are planning for housing that is affordable to all the different income levels of people that potentially live in the community. And so single family homes can often be the most expensive type of home. And so if you have a range of different types of homes, it could be a townhome. And for a city at this potential size, like there is, you don't have the same kind of requirements of even Astoria or Salem, you know, like the requirements are very different for a small city like this than it is for a larger city, or really cities over 10,000. You know, when you get to the 10,000 mark, then things start to kind of jump. But at that point, the allowed uses and the lot sizes to a good extent is up to the city, and it's definitely up to the city to administer and implement. But I did encourage, one of the things when we started getting into this, we had a webinar and it's recorded online with the Department of Land Conservation and Development to really try to describe many of those requirements that come down from the state.
Becky, can I say, just to just give my overly simplistic answer than it is to that really good question. I think you all know there's statewide land use planning goals. And there is, correct me if I'm wrong, 19 of them.
Yep.
And every zoning code, whether it's county or city, has to comply with those statewide land use planning goals. So creating a city doesn't mean we've got free rein. But we do, if we form a city, have the ability to adopt our zoning ordinances. We're gonna have the burden. And I think we got a lot of local expertise to do this, of demonstrating when we adopt that zoning code, that it's consistent with each of those broad statewide goals. But we do have the ability to adopt a zoning ordinance that says, what are the lot sizes? You know, what are the setback requirements? You know, et cetera. So there's, and that is honestly one of the principal motivating factors is within the limits of the state land use planning goals, to have the ability to comply with those goals, but adopt our own unique code.
Bob, I do just want, there was a comment online that was like, and I hope I get this correct, but that even if a sub area opted out, they could be incorporated kind of against their will. And Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a sub area opted out, then the recommendation from the steering committee would to not include that area, correct?
That's right.
So, yeah, so it's not the intent, the steering committee, I think, would not include a sub area that said, we don't want to be part of it.
How does the sub area say that? The sub area is a bunch of people, so you take a vote, how do you know what the sub area wants to do?
You got to talk to the people who are on the steering committee that represent your sub area.
People who run the steering committee, what does the sub area, you take a poll, what if somebody says, oh, I'd rather not be part of this, right?
You submit, your opinion, your desire, either by email or in comment.
Mhm.
And yeah, put it on record.
So for the folks online, you can submit a comment and just let us know which sub area that you're in, whether or not you wanted to be in it.
I can send it back. Yeah, I'll look at it.
Bob, it is 8:15.
I think we should.
Going out. All right.
But and remind folks that this is not the last opportunity for questions and input.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so actually, that was a really good point. We do have online the, I've got a couple, if you want to look through all the work. We do have, a copies of the report that are online, and there is a couple different places online where you can actually submit things in writing there. You can talk to people. And again, the steering committee is going to be talking and having these conversations over the next roughly 2 months. And they're hoping to come to some recommendations for incorporation or not, for the different levels of service, potentially where that revenue would come from in November. So
And Becky,
please talk to people before November.
the folks that are online, we haven't forgotten about them. Scott is gonna stay with them, and Rick Smith is gonna stay with them to collect any feedback they may have when we all move out here.
Yes, so Scott, you can probably go ahead and I hope you're the host. You are the host, I know, so you can have the conversation with folks online. So I'm gonna sign off now.
Sounds
you.
good.